I occasionally frequented the Theosophical Society in the city, enjoying light lunches in the canteen and meeting interesting people. One day I happened to talk to a group of young people about astronomy, space travel, and extraterrestrials visiting Earth. A young gentleman with long copper-colored hair asked me if I could guess his name. I was surprised by this, hoping that his interest was nothing more than curiosity or eccentricity. I looked at him and asked why he felt like testing me, and he answered saying that he sensed something different about me, particularly when talking about intergalactic visitors. "Tell me what my name is," he asked again. I told him that his name started with the letter R, and it sounded like Ross or Rossiter, but I was unsure. He looked at me. His face turned white and said that he was not wrong when he first thought I was different. Then he added, "My name is Ross." I was certainly very surprised. I guess it was a form of thought transference, although I was unsure about the validity of it. In reality, from my childhood, I was very sensitive about people around me, able to sense their intentions, their lingual backgrounds, and even at times their name and occupation. It felt almost as if the keepers of knowledge were assisting me. I often greeted people in their mother tongue, surprising them immensely, as I still do. But I did not do much name-guessing. This was different. At the time, Ross was not employed and lived with his elder brother, who did not believe in anything, and his father lived somewhere near Frankston. We started meeting at the Theosophical Society from time to time. He was friendly with other people of mature age, and a few spoke of him as if he was the return of Jesus with his looks. He was interested in esoteric sciences, electronics, and space travel. Soon we began meeting in the city over a meal or just window shopping, and later I visited him at his brother's and met his father. He introduced his other friends, Michael, Rick, and David, who were all modernists. Michael was an industrial chemist and had a very young girlfriend. David was into health foods and music. Rick worked for a phone company and was into building his own synthesizer. Michael had also built his own keyboard and was keenly interested in playing Scottish, Irish, and Australian tunes. He lived with his girlfriend in South Yarra, in an old two-story Victorian house, where occasionally television programmers filmed some of the soapies. Ross, with David and a few other friends, were practicing music in their garage. I joined in, offering my compositions and occasionally singing during the practices. Later I met their female singer. At one stage we performed Jesus Christ Superstar at various venues, and sometimes even in one of the churches. We called the group by a variety of names at first, but I suggested calling it Scarlet Hills. Ross was keen, playing drums and riding motorcycles, just like me. One Sunday afternoon, when riding together for the fun of it, we dropped in at a meeting place of other bikers for refreshments. However, while waiting, someone from the crowd hit me right in my back with his elbow for some unknown reason, and it really hurt. I was shocked. I thought someone had shot at me, but I could not see who it was trying to hurt me. Luckily, the pain and shock did not last long, and we left to keep going and enjoy our outing. It was very strange, and I still ask why such treatment was necessary. Maybe it was due to racial hatred, or a case of mistaken identity on the part of that unfortunate person who hit me without showing his face. Maybe it was their kind of fun, hurting a stranger, but it did not deter us from having many enjoyable rides. Ross was intrigued with the Victorian spiritualists in Beckett Street. Occasionally, I started going there with him, making new friends. Magda never approved of my going out and spending time with my other friends, and yet she hardly spent any time with me, instead spending long hours with her faithful kin, like an obedient puppy. What could I do other than go out and make new friends? I literally had no home, no family, and no wife anymore. My home became like a prison in a foreign land, even a cold and bleak graveyard. I was only going home to sleep, and occasionally dine on my own, as Magda and the children under her supervision were not greeting me any longer. But I was still providing her with whatever income I generated. I could do naught else other than just wait for the inevitable dissolution of the marriage and lose everything. However, I was going to remain patient to the end. Alas, that end was in an unknown state I was extremely worried about, although I had been told by a number of older people that men don't cry and don't feel any pain. How could anyone deal with the emotional pain? Perhaps my knowledge of psychology would be of some help. Or would it? At one point, I went to a VSU afternoon service, and Ross also came along. I felt so happy for becoming a completely rebellious man against my control-freak wife's Jehovah's Witness absurdity. Perhaps due to me being a newcomer, the female demonstrator chose to speak to me directly, telling me, allegedly under psychic inspiration, words I could never believe and also never forget. "My friend, there is a very important-looking gentleman standing here with me, urging me to tell you something you may not like, but he is urging me to tell you nevertheless. He seems to be a Greek Orthodox priest, and I believe he is your guardian, and is saying that you are going to experience a separation and divorce from your family." I immediately responded, "I suppose I cannot help it any more, as it is expected." Upon this, she added, "But strangely you are not even stirred. It is most unusual." I said, "But what can I do if my partner wishes to break away? If that is what she is going to do, she will do just that. If she had truly loved me and her family in the first place, she would not listen to others with their cultist viewpoints for guidance." I was utterly surprised, and yet, being highly critical by nature, I contemplated that probably somebody who knew me had spoken about this issue previously to the psychic lady, but Jehovah's Witnesses would under no circumstances talk to spiritualists whom they consider as devil worshippers, and certainly I had never spoken about myself or my circumstances to anybody at that time. I remained a very private person, as I still am. On the other hand, I was visiting them for the very first time that afternoon, and nobody there knew me. Ross could not have told anything to anybody at that stage, for we had never spoken anything about my circumstances. Although my mother was cognizant with spiritual matters, and has been reading coffee grounds and tea leaves for fun, like my other relatives, and taken me to so-called soothsayers. I personally never took them very seriously. In fact, I never considered them as genuine. But this one at the VSU was different. I wondered about it, asking how she knew all about my family breakdown. There had to be something to it, and I was sure that one day I would discover that too. Ross came to meet me once at our place, and seeing him at the door, Magda spoke to me indirectly that I was befriended with other Satan worshippers, and told the children that she never wanted to see these kind of characters, especially those who looked like the Native Americans at our home. I only hoped that Ross did not hear her. Before I started my employment with the state government at Melbourne Town Hall, I worked for the Collingwood Council, dealing with mothercraft, ethnic liaison, and health issues in the area. What I was involved in was similar to the 7 Combined Schools project. Before everything went out of hand, Magda had been telling me how tired she was, and perhaps, as her brothers suggested, she should take time and have a little holiday without the children, and she vehemently decided to fly over to Hobart and stay with the Kurdewigs, or Strohbachs, for a few days, leaving me to look after the children. I accepted the proposal gladly, for perhaps she would calm down when she returned, and we could still save the family's sinking boat, as per her terminology. I certainly had many chances to have different girlfriends, but it was not my interest, although I met a number of friendly ladies. Some were students, others were employed in jobs like the nursing profession, or even modeling. It was always more interesting talking to them, but my interest remained frozen there, as I did not want to hurt Magda. But when things became absolutely hopeless, my need to have companionship in the outside world became vitally important, as I was still a young man in need to be loved and valued, similarly needing to love someone. Living in a loveless family is extremely detrimental for any human being. There were times when just talking to a girl was helpful to get me out of morbid thought patterns, such as removing myself altogether from the face of the earth. After having lots of severe argumentations with Magda, I preferred to take long walks, ending up in the city for cups of coffee and talking to other humans, because at my supposed home I was not seen as a human being any longer. However, I did not fancy what some other humans were engaged in, such as smoking heavily or drinking to forget their problems, instead preferring to walk in the fresh air and have cups of hot drinks. If I could stay home, I would either play a few of my favorite pieces on the keyboard or listen to music for many hours, but it was not allowed. With Magda's state of mind and keeping the children away from me, I would have no choice other than sit in a lonesome corner, close my eyes, and concentrate on my problems silently, with tears rolling down my cheeks, which she would either never see or completely ignore. Unfortunately, as Gail Poole puts it, even with the best of maps and instruments, we can never fully chart our journeys. Going back in time, I remember how unwilling Magda was to let the children go out anywhere in case I attempted to take them to worldly places where they could be subjected to evil activities, such as birthday parties, or to the cinema to watch lots of lies, such as science fiction films depicting killing and bloodshed, and worst of all, they may portray black art. What if I took them to places where people allegedly worshipped the devil, as Magda believed, such as the Theosophical Society or spiritualists. Just imagine. Remember, she has never been to those places. I knew for sure that she used to instruct the children to tell her where they were taken in full detail on their return, and Annette often told her mother, whispering, "I will, I promise." I could hear clearly, although pretending I had not. Was it a genuine promise or a lie to appease her? Indeed, I occasionally took them to other friends' places, when, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses allowed my children to come out with me, under the dark shadow of Magda's complete control, to meet children from different races and nationalities, for I knew they could learn so much from such encounters. However, because those children were not of Jehovah's Witness background, they could only be classified as evil or worldly, according to my wife. Almost all Jehovah's Witness parents teach their children to hate the world and try everything possible to keep them with only those of their kind. Sadly, children growing up in such an atmosphere become excessively discriminative. I observed how Magda used to literally force them to tell her everything they did and learned at school when they started their prep and primary education. At times, I have seen them bitterly cry, being punished for allegedly not telling the truth. According to Magda, they had to be disciplined now, before it was too late. That meant forever being interrogated and regularly physically punished to give them a direction in life. In other words, the children were not allowed to be children. They were forced only to please Jehovah God, always forced to utter silent prayers before every meal, and sometimes subjected to abuse, like being sent to bed without food, because they did not pray. If they laughed at something they found funny, wooden spoons had to be broken on their buttocks, subjected to their mother's beatings. A godly discipline like that was apparently vital to save their lives when the world ended. As time went by, Magda strictly chose never to accept or believe in me, as she discovered that I was not interested in what she believed as the only truth. Alas, we had a third child I loved so dearly, for he was somehow different compared with the other two. This did not mean I loved the others less. However, they were really their mother's sweethearts, following her every dictate and keeping away from me as often as they could. Maybe they did not want to be punished if they wanted to spend a little time with their father. Right in the beginning, as you will remember, Magda's parents used to snatch Annette from my arms as soon as they noticed me holding the child, feeding or cleaning her, while Magda was doing other chores. Even then, the grandparents were alienating the child against me, knowingly or unknowingly. After the second child was born, Magda continued with the same tradition. Particularly now that she discovered I was uninterested in their so-called truth, not sharing the expected witness activities, and basically kicked out of their midst. I was declared evil. Jehovah's Witnesses indirectly encouraged her to separate from that unbelieving husband, and she made sure that the children were well trained to hate the evil. Alas, I was part of that evil world. I will tell you more about it soon. Magda believed she was doing the right thing by keeping the children away from their evil father, alienating them against him. I also know that she was praised by her faithful brothers and sisters for doing so. However, being the youngest, Claude was so far the closest and friendliest. Even that was seen by Magda as dangerous, and whenever she saw me playing with my son, encouraging him to play the keyboards or put on a clown's nose for a photo shoot, as we had done before, she always had an excuse to call the child over just to keep him away from me, the evil one. I believe her dearest brothers and sisters encouraged her to do all that due to me being deservedly disfellowshipped. To tell you the truth, I was frightened about Jehovah's Witness elders having access to my children because of their reputation of child abuse, in their case, which they sweep under the carpet. I never wanted to believe this, but hearing so many stories like that would make any decent parent shiver. However, this never stirred Magda. We will also talk about this issue in a moment. I prefer to live a life of truthfulness and not a pretentious one, but regrettably I had been forced to lead a life of pretense for far too long. If she really knew what love was, she would understand me when I was finally able to tell her what I believed. If she still rejected me, I would know where I stood, knowing that she had never loved me in the first place. The witnesses she adored had to tell her how she should live. For a very long time, no opportunity was afforded to me to explain myself, for every attempt was taken as if I was joking. I was forced to hide myself behind the curtains of shame until then. But what was there to be ashamed of? When I started to speak the real truth, my worst nightmares were realized. It may not have been as painful for her as it was for me. Breaking away from my children was unthinkable, for they were my world. In truth, I had no one to turn to, whereas she had her faithful brothers, sisters, and leaders to listen to. Before things started getting out of hand, I tried to converse with her in an amicable way about my dilemmas with the witnesses. I had several questions about their teachings and things they believed in or expected to happen. I was never able to get a satisfactory answer, other than just being responded to with "Do not question the Spirit," or "Leave it to Jehovah, and he will teach you the right way of thinking." They were always vague in answering questions, and created the impression of unease when questioned, thus proving that they did not know the answers to what they were preaching, only pretending to be knowledgeable. They were, however, very good at condemning and judging others. Without discrimination for their lack, one could not have an intellectual conversation with any of them. My questions were responded to in the harshest way one can imagine. Instead of listening to me and responding as the wife I once adored, Magda treated me like those other witnesses did. She was certainly under their spell and strictest instructions. When she did respond to me, she preferred to open the pages of her Bible and quote from the supposed righteous advice given in the Scriptures. Obviously, she elected to treat me not as her husband and friend, but as God's enemy and the rejected one. Remember, she was only meant to speak the truth, and never judge me or anyone according to Jehovah's Witness wisdom. Due to my wife's intense adherence to supposed Bible principles, I feel the situation deserves a reasonably intense and analytical observation. Taking this into account, we discover by studying the characteristic teachings of the witnesses that apparently only God could judge, and divine wrath belonged to him alone, which the Holy Scripts appear to support in a Christian sense. Making sure that I did not sound as if I was judging her, I cautiously and gently spoke to Magda, but she always answered me angrily, shouting and reminding me that God loved those who obeyed His rules. I asked her why that same God had sent His only begotten Son to wipe off the sins of the world, and yet the world was full of people who did not obey the divine rules and regulations. She did not know how to answer, and could only reply saying that I was the evil one, and served my master, Satan, the devil. It was obvious that I was wasting my time by trying to explain anything. Remember, being completely under the influence and directives of her faithful brothers, everything for her had to be in black and white, and there was nothing in between. This is also a psychologically observable characteristic which many Jehovah's Witnesses portray. I did not think that there was anything left in common between us. I looked at the girl I once loved, but she was no longer there. She had been taken away and replaced by an unbelievably dogmatic Jehovah's Witness. Reluctantly, I had to accept my sentence as seen fit by the members of an archaic religious order. Those dogmatic teachings were to remain extremely limited and forever repetitious, keeping their adherents in complete bondage. People who were caught in their net were the only faithful ones whose future was determined. All of them apparently realized that there was a shortness of time before the wicked world ended, and they were ready to live forever in a new world without strife and enmity. It was God's will for Jesus to throw the old dragon, the devil, into the abyss for 1,000 years, and release him at the end of that period of time. If God's faithful servants still remained faithful until then, they were to be tested one final time, and when eligible, granted everlasting life. And the evildoers would be condemned to everlasting fire and brimstone into eternity, or just wiped off. Magda did not want to have a future like the evildoers, but rather as one of God's chosen. One can understand how fearful she became, for the end might happen any time now. Her motherly instincts kicking in, she had to save her children when the time was ripe. At this stage, she and the other witnesses were very keen to indoctrinate our 3 children well, so that they would hate every evil in the world, including their father, who questioned the Spirit. I became very aware of their freezing, cold attitude towards me as time advanced. Unfortunately, the indoctrination they were subjected to was destined to destroy their trust in me, forcing their love and trust towards me being completely eliminated, just to please their mother, thus leading them into becoming God's servants for the rest of their lives. I knew by then that I was not going to have them around me for very long. By observing their developing attitudes, I knew that they were capable of telling believable lies to their mother, for she was ever ready to hear all kinds of untruths about me. For example, casting evil spells. I felt devastated, sad, and totally lost. From then on, they had to remain faithful to their mother, whether she told them untruths or not, continually ready to deny the real truth as lies told by their father, without even realizing. I was certainly not wrong in assuming that this would prove to be correct, as you will discover later. I was hearing from other people talking of Magda's discoveries about me drifting deeper into devil worship with my behavior, my alleged belief in the dark forces, and many lies, veering away from the life-saving truth, listening to satanic advice. I was apparently questioning the spirit incessantly, for although everything like theft and child abuse could be forgiven, sinning against the spirit was unforgivable, and associating with the witches and spiritualists against Jehovah's will, according to their understanding of Bible wisdom, was like fornicating with the absolute evil. I was allegedly spending too much time singing evil Christmassy songs with those worldly people in pagan choirs, apart from lecturing evil and not God-approved subjects to the unfaithful worldly people at the university, instead of talking God's truths in the kingdom halls. And so I had hardly any time for my family and children. Hearing something like, "Dad, Mom told us if we go with you, God will punish us," was like having salt being poured in gaping wound, and most hurtful. I might sound like a broken record, repeating myself, but whenever I attempted to go to places like a restaurant or cinema with the children, she always had all kinds of excuses to keep them away from me for a very long time, saying she had promised to take them out herself, visiting her friends and probably going house to house with them. Whenever I asked them what they really wanted to do, they usually opted to go with their mother, but I believe it was out of the fear they were inflicted with. Rarely Annette wanted to come out with me. When home, she was immediately subjected to interrogation to tell her mother everything she did and ate, Magda often asking her if Dad taught her anything of the satanic kind, which I pretended not to hear. Sometimes Magda, not believing her, chose to punish her, breaking a wooden spoon or two on her rear. This treatment was geared to make the child never want to go with her father for fear of being punished. All truthful and God-loving Magda had to be the one who cared for them, and always spoke the truth. She was definitely making sure that I did not take them out for excessively evil and pagan practices like birthday celebrations or Christmas lunch. A long time ago, in our reasonably happier days, while sitting down and relaxing in the lounge, there was a big blowfly buzzing around, and I jokingly told her I was going to direct my thoughts to that fly and will it to land on the wall. Then, while she was sipping her tea, I told her that it was going to disappear from the wall, and as she looked at the wall, it disappeared. In reality, it flew off. Then, for a joke, I told her that now I wanted the fly to reappear on the same spot. While she was taking another mouthful of her drink, the fly landed in the same spot. Seeing it, Magda shouted, "Yikes! How did you do that? Hope it's not magic." Later, she spoke all about it to her faithful brothers, and they in turn advised her that such magic acts were not approved of God, for they were evil. According to the children and other witnesses I spoke to, I had apparently practiced black art, and ever since, even when I was not home, seemingly things like furniture and cutlery occasionally moved on their own due to my being allegedly involved in magic. In short, I was accused by her and her faithful brothers of being engaged in black magic, and it was evil. I could not make her believe in anything I said. She had decided to reject me with my all, making me feel completely discarded from her life. Here is a little more detail about the story I briefly mentioned earlier. One Friday morning she told me her brothers were coming over and demanded that I stay home as it was vitally important for her. Any work commitment was not important on my part other than obeying the changed rules of the day. Later, before their arrival, she told me that the brothers coming over were members of the Jehovah's Witnesses Judicial Committee, intending to talk to me in detail, for she hoped and prayed that we could save our marriage. I felt like telling her that since this marriage seemed to be dependent on both of us being in that so-called truth, which to me was nothing but an interpretation of the scriptures by a couple of well-meaning folk in the United States, I could not accept it as my truth. Then, she said, we have nothing to live for without the truth, and so we cannot be together for too long. I responded with, I still believe in true love being unconditional. I had been expecting something like this to happen, and hopefully the pretentious existence I had been leading would finally come to an end. By giving her the utmost freedom for what she wanted to do with her life as a free agent, for all human life needs to be independent and free, I was not going to force my will on her under any circumstances, for I needed no slaves. But it would be lovely to share one's life with a truly loving partner. I felt that Jehovah's Witnesses were choking me to death from every conceivable corner. I stayed home, and the committee finally made it to our place at about 7:30 in the evening. Magda was very excited, happy, and trying to show her brothers what a lovely mother and wife she was by preparing cups of coffee and little snacks for her righteous guests. We sat in the lounge, engaging in friendly conversation, talking about work, study, and my lecturing in important subjects. However, they kept looking at each other and were not at all attentive to what I was saying to them. As they continued sipping their coffees, one of them made a comment about what a great mother and partner Magda was, caring for the spiritual needs of her children. What a good woman she was, caring for her family. And the other said, he hoped that I was a caring husband. Surprised, but in control, I told them how much I loved my family, and that was one of the major reasons why I was desirous to improve our financial standing and help her live a good life without struggle. The other said, but you don't want to be too materialistic? That sounded familiar. This led me to question the questioner, if he was working, but there was no response. Suddenly, changing their tactics, they began to question me about my private affairs, as if I was sinning by working with other women, advising me to be more careful not to hurt my wife by sleeping around with other females. Did working with other women in a democratic society mean sleeping around with the opposite gender? I wondered what the witnesses had been gossiping about me. They started using Bible texts to back up their claims, quoting from the books they had been preaching from when going house to house, while also treating me as if I was the subject of judgment in front of a judge in a country court. They looked like primary school children arguing over something we adults would consider completely trivial. I regarded it as a tasteless comedy and decided to speak of a few Bible texts I was knowledgeable of in respect to what Jesus was teaching, that no one should judge anyone. Do not judge. One of them remarked that I was very knowledgeable about Bible teachings, and therefore I should understand fully what they were about. Magda was hoping they would be able to make me understand the importance of serving Jehovah without question. Science and knowledge based on logic was not acceptable as far as the witnesses were concerned, for their limited wisdom had to be based on no logical construction, but rather on a repetitious biblical one, which they present in various forms, meaning the same thing, using more words than necessary. On one side, they claim scriptural wisdom being simple and easy to understand, whereas they try to complicate their own words when preaching things they do not fully comprehend. Therefore, when questioned, they have no answers. When they are stuck, the only easy way for them is to condemn, judge, and disfellowship the questioner. Then they questioned me point blank, speaking at the same time, asking if I was still attending the evildoers' temple services. Somewhat surprised, I asked them to explain what they meant by that. "Come, come," said one. "Our sister, as you know, never tells any fibs, and she told us all about it. We are talking about your involvement with witches, soothsayers, Buddhists, Hindus, and pagans. We are also talking about the ungodly practices of the Catholic Church and others like spiritualists." Another exclaimed that I should understand that going to churches or temples of all devil worshippers was a very dangerous practice, and believing in their teachings was a grievous sin against God. "Now, I'm going to ask you again. Do you go to those places?" asked one. I answered, saying that I went to St. Paul's for choir singing. "What was the occasion?" "Entertainment, and for Christmas." "But Christmas is a pagan practice. Do you go to those temples also?" Yet another asked, "Do you realize it is the sin to associate with devil worshippers?" "Are you really so sure?" "And how?" I asked the questioner. "What if I am conducting a research program for professional curiosity and interest?" "What do you mean with that?" After a brief pause, he continued, "Besides, you cannot ask us any questions, for we are the only ones qualified to ask questions for you to answer." I politely responded, "If you cannot accept my questions, we have nothing else to speak. You can understand that much, I hope." "Tell me, what do you think about psychology?" asked one. Magda answered, "Oh, but they hypnotize people against their will, and that is evil." Another commented, "That is when the servants of Satan, the devil, interferes with the free will of the individuals, and therefore it is an evil practice. We can only encourage you not to be involved with anything contrary to Jehovah's ways." "Tell me," I asked, "does God really forbid us to help people to feel better about their life and become successful with their undertakings?" "That is why we bring the good news to people," was the answer. Magda was intermittently telling me, "You see, that is why I was telling you. I was trying to tell you, but perhaps you had to hear it from our brothers." We continued having more cups of tea, coffee, and snacks. After a short period of silence, one of our guests asked me, "Do you still see the evil spirits? Do you still see the UFOs? And do you talk to the servants of the devil?" Obviously, after what Magda had been explaining to them, her alleged truth in respect to my person, and her dreamt of characteristics I was accused of, I deliberately said that I was talking to the servants of the devil right now, that they were all seated in front of me. But they did not get the point. It was so unusual for me to be questioned like this. I felt the need to take the opportunity to tell them what they were aching to hear. I was not intending to prolong their curiosity, and told them that it was now my turn. Now, good people, if you would listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. Currently, if you have not been told already, I am practicing behavioral psychology, which I studied for many years without your support or encouragement. And it seems that what I know is far removed from your current comprehension. Psychology is a down-to-earth science, endeavoring to find solutions to people's emotional problems, while also helping them understand their own selves. It is a science which assists the inquirer to discover why human beings behave and think the way they do. It is a science aimed at finding ways for people willing to help themselves. And yes, I am teaching this science and more. Magda looked bewildered as she said, "You never explained it before. What other surprises I can expect of you, I wonder?" I answered, "But I have tried, and before hearing me out, you had your own conclusions about psychology, and most importantly about my personal characteristics. You cut me off every time." Upon which one of her dear brothers said, "Well, you should know that it is an evil practice, that is all." As soon as I said, "No, I cannot accept your assumptions, for they are untrue," Magda raised her voice and told me, "You are a rebel, an evil man. How can you talk to our brothers like that? There is no respect." Then one of them had an attitude problem. Verbally attacking, he said, "So you are now also against our judgments, and it is God's word you must listen." However, God's words are written by men, like you and I. Therefore I say that anything that leads people into darkness cannot be the truth. Then I asked if a loving God would destroy his supposed primary creation, men, in a worldwide flood, as we read in the Scriptures. And during their building of a tower, for whatever reason, he confused their tongues and nullified their endeavors. That same God was believed to be the only one who was of supreme order, and one could not understand such childish behavior on his part. It did not make any sense. God declares throughout his words we read in the Scriptures that he is a jealous God, and the wrath is his. Was there perhaps a wrong interpretation of his wisdom? Were these servants of God inspired to judge and condemn people like me for sins committed in opposition to their teachings? So you don't even believe in the Bible, the Word of God? If the Bible is so true, then tell me, I said, opening several pages from their holy book, and telling them about some of the discrepancies therein. Besides, I continued, why in the first place did God create every opportunity possible for humans to sin? In answer, one of them said, "Oh, but Jehovah had to test them to see if they were worthy of the everlasting life." I responded again with a question. However, what if life is everlasting anyway, only expressed in different dimensions? They looked at each other in a manner one could psychologically interpret, and was certain that they realized they were not going to get anywhere with me. I asked, why did God allow humans to commit incest right from the beginning? if you are familiar with what I am pointing at. There was silence while they sipped their coffee and tea, which Magda graciously prepared for them. Then yet another asked, "How can you talk something like that?" At first I smiled, knowingly, and exclaimed, "Perhaps he just wanted to play games with his little toys." A long pause ensued. Suddenly, another of our guests asked in an angry tone of voice, "According to our sister, who can only tell the truth, you are talking to the spirits, listening to devils, and inviting UFOs. Tell us why you are still doing these things. Have you never learned that engaging in those things is sinful, and Jehovah commands us never to consult evil spirits?" Did she physically see me do these things, or was she delighting in telling them what they wanted to hear? Remember what she eagerly repeated, that when someone told her a lie as true, and she preached about it, nobody should blame her telling a lie. I was now in an extremely stirring mood, and so I commented, "You certainly remember the early beginnings of the organization and Charles Taze Russell's primary involvement with the Masonic Order. According to his understanding, talking to the spirits can be seen similar to praying to God. In truth, I believe in thought transference, and who knows, maybe we are all inspired by the inhabitants of other worlds in a wonderful universe. That universe is certainly filled with many life forms other than us. Even in your Bible, you can read heavens declaring the glory of God. What should we understand of it? Are we the only creation within the entire universe? There were no answers relating to subjects I questioned. Maybe I should have remembered that I was involved in an elementary school children's debate. A little while later, I turned to one of the Jehovah's Witness elders seated on my left and told him, "By the way, your grandmother is trying to communicate with you, as she was attempting to do for a very long time since you came. She is reminding you of your high school days, and if you remember all those years ago, you were asking her if it was any good after the school concert. Remember, you wished your other grandmother was there to see you. The other one is asking me to tell you she was also there, and she remembers it all with every detail. They are encouraging me to tell you that if you want, they will recite them for you." This was a great shock to every one of them, and I noticed some very pale faces, and felt they were experiencing a sense of extreme fear and confusion. Obviously, they could only interpret it according to what they were trained to believe. In truth, I was pretending, thanks to my theatrical training. I will tell you a little more about my debate with the Judicial Committee members in a little while, but first let me talk about how it all ended. They looked at each other, and at least two of them looked terrified, as if the devil was trying to tempt the faithful. They were uttering prayers in a whisper and trepidation. The others exclaimed that it was 100% correct, and only the devil could know all the details. I responded with, "Oh, you mean this devil is a very intelligent dude?" One seated directly opposite me said, "Dear sister, we have nothing else left to speak." They were no longer looking in my direction, and trying their utmost not to have any eye contact, while I was laughing at them from within. All of a sudden, I was like the wind, gently blowing in the forest, and they no longer acknowledged my presence. I felt for them, and especially for Magda. One of them said, You will hear from us soon." So saying, they could not leave us fast enough, as if running away from the Black Plague. Completely shaken, Magda could not contain her tears as she accompanied them to the door, and stood outside for well over an hour, chatting with them. I could hear all her agonizing concerns and words like, "You cannot live with a devil worshipper and an apostate like him, but he is still your husband. You must reconsider your position." One could hear her crying voice telling them, "I will have to leave him now, and my concern is their children." As she entered like a raging bull, slamming the door behind her, she must have thought I wanted to hug her, and shouted very loudly, pushing me with her shoulder, saying, "You Satan! Don't you ever touch me!" She called the children to her and started telling them, "We'll find a way to live somewhere else, and I am not going to allow the evil one to touch you." However, I feel the need to tell you a little more about how she almost immediately began the strict indoctrination of our children, which was supposedly to protect them from me, teaching them not to have anything to do with the devil, and that their father had committed the greatest sin the moment he told her the truth. She would not even allow me to say a word. For several days she would not talk to me, as if I was there only to hurt them. As far as she was concerned, I was the rejected of God, and therefore unimportant to speak of or to. When any of the children laughed with me or attempted to ask me something, Magda always made sure they went to her for completely no reason. She deliberately had a question to ask them, or tell them to get her a glass of water. It was all done to keep them occupied so that they could never approach me. Besides, she could never talk to someone shunned like me, for she would commit a great sin in line with their teachings, leading her to be disfellowshipped. When she wanted to go to the shops, every one of them was forced to go with her. When she wanted to go house to house to preach, they were all ordered to go with their mother. When she had to go out on her own, she strictly advised them to go to their rooms and read the Bible, and not approach their daddy. Was I by any chance a piece of furniture, or dog's poo? Even in my wildest dreams, I never imagined so much hatred being directed at me. Obviously, she was doing what she was dictated to do by her most faithful brothers and sisters. Who, indeed, was the real master and originator of complete hatred, according to Jehovah's Witness teachings? This is just one thought to ponder on. This went on for a very long time. Whenever she returned from her most important associations and service, discovering Annette, for instance, happily chatting with her father, she immediately called the child to do something completely out of place, and as time went on, the children began to develop a mildly rebellious attitude towards their mother. This led them to being severely punished by her. Those punishments were extremely hurtful, and could be classified as child abuse. But I dared say nothing. Much later, one discovers Annette having developed a form of trauma, like self-hatred, self-mutilations, and consuming cleaning liquids more often than before, when she occasionally swallowed those chemicals after being attracted to these colorful bottles. I was literally forced to feel guilty for crimes uncommitted. Was my care and love for my family a crime, because I had different opinions and belief systems? Since we had no verbal communication, I attempted to talk to her as if I was talking to the air. She must then have spoken to her faithful brothers as she began to talk to me only about necessities like bill payment, shopping, and what the children needed. The members of her real family must have reiterated that she should be able to communicate with her husband, who was, after all, the children's father. And she later confirmed this. Alas, she was simply a witness's servant, blindly following their dictates. In reality, this was not a new development, and probably impossible to change. After many months, she slowly allowed me to at least laugh with my children, and Birgit began to show me her works of art, which she did at school. However, Magda wanted to keep Claude only to herself. Birgit, even at that very young age, occasionally asked me if I loved her as much as I loved Annette, obliging me to explain that my love was forever for every one of them. She even asked me if I loved her mother, making one wonder why a child of her age had to question me like that. How could one answer? Despite all the nonsense I was subjected to, my love was unconditional, for I love every human being, while Magda's love needed to grow. I remember how Birgit had poured boiling water from the top of the stove, burning part of her face and chest when she was about 2. I remember how worried I was when taking her to the Royal Children's Hospital. Her burns were 3rd degree, but after some important procedure she was subjected to, and large sums paid by me to a specialist from overseas, we were advised that it would leave no marks as she grew older. But in the meantime, she needed a few skin grafts and blood transfusions. Magda was happy with every other procedure, but she would never allow any blood transfusions. This panicked the nurses, doctors, and me, because without the transfusion she would not survive, as she had already lost a considerable amount of blood. Magda showed her no blood transfusions card, issued by the witnesses, and strictly advised the medical staff against any such treatment. It was beyond me to see one's child suffer and die due to such criminal neglect. What did members of the Jehovah's Witnesses Judicial Committee consider such unethical behavior pattern on their part? I think we all know the answer to that. There was a desperate need to discreetly speak with the doctors and nurses, telling them to do everything possible to save Birgit's life. I was even prepared to give my own blood if there was need, and it matched. They gave her a certain amount of blood, and her color became healthier, and nearly a month later she was home. Out of all my love, I would not deny her the necessary treatment. Yet, in remembering that memorable occasion, I am not implying that her mother did not care. Magda did not know anything about my interference, but if I had not done anything, Birgit would not be with us today. Magda was following a cultist movement which did not care about physical life. Maybe they should not have been born, instead waiting until the new world is established after Armageddon. Maybe their God Jehovah did not think it important at the time. On the other hand, we discover Annette often foaming from her mouth as she had drunk poisonous liquids from the colorful bottles in the laundry or toilet, and rushed her to hospital. If there was no love, how could I even think about immediately taking her in the ambulance to hospital for necessary medical procedures? They were kept in supposedly child-proof cupboards, but somehow she managed to open them. But remember, right in the beginning, when she was a few weeks old, her grandparents had been snatching her from my hands, telling me she was theirs. Even if that was meant to be one of their coldest jokes, it left quite a remarkable impression on Annette's personality. One could not be sure what she had been told about me, especially after being condemned as the great sinner by the Jehovah's Witness elders for my grave sins against the Spirit. I cannot forget how Magda tried hard to alienate them against me in the name of a God she had been introduced to when studying the Bible with the witnesses, considering his divine rules for discipline. That also had an influence on the children's attitude towards life, further turning them against me, their father. Magda was a confused soul who sought advice from a group of witnesses she trusted, allegedly following Jehovah's rules. But did she ever realize she was actually following mediocre-minded friends who considered themselves as the witnesses of God? They were certainly passionate about their own personalized viewpoints as being the grand truth, following a few uninspired men. Now Magda was advised to consider that I was still her husband, and although she wanted to leave me, she could not, unless I committed another grievous sin by having a sexual relationship with another woman. In a sense, she was expecting me to do just that, and this way she would have a good reason to officially leave me. These memories keep churning in my head whenever I think of her special words, and so I tend to repeat myself quite analytically, leading me to discover new lines of concern. I have no doubt in my mind that she never loved me as I loved her, although she never spoke about it directly. The influence of her parental home, when still a spinster and just starting to know me, the foreigner, had some bearing. Repeatedly responding to me with "love can grow" whenever I asked her if she loved me. I was not sure if she had really loved me or cared at all. Whenever we spoke about her desire to leave me, I told her that after this one experience, I would not want to be involved in marriage any more. She often told me she would also not want to be married to anybody unless somebody truly faithful came along. Maybe one day, I told her, we will see each other from a distance, when we are old and grey, and say that it is too late now, too late to rekindle the love we thought was ours. After that wonderful meeting with the Judicial Committee, she was advised, as she told me after a weekly gathering, that her dear brothers and sisters had advised her to talk to me, and maybe I would sincerely seek God's forgiveness, and they could again accept me in their midst. How thoughtful! However, I would probably need a long time, during which I would be subjected to daily Bible studies with an appointed servant of Jehovah. Many years later, they were to change their tactics by allowing the excommunicated to come and sit in the kingdom halls, although nobody would ever talk to or greet them, for shunning due to their extreme hatred of the disobedient was part of the faith. About a week later, they sent me the expected letter of great importance, which declared that under divine guidance, and after considering the facts in light of the Bible teachings, I was now disfellowshipped and no longer called a brother. I wondered how they can do so under the divine guidance when they themselves now declare that they are not inspired and can err. Can you imagine how delighted I was? Listen to what Henry Wadsworth Longfellow says. If spring came but once a century instead of once a year, or burst forth with the sound of an earthquake, and not in silence, what wonder and expectation there would be in all the hearts to behold the miraculous change.